Good morning. Every year, North Park University explores what we call enduring questions of human experience in our campus theme. So this year's campus theme is, What is Truth? In October, author Gerardo Cardenas addressed Truth as Strange as Fiction, Lessons from Our Lady of the Viaduct. In November, we heard from U.S. Poet Laureate Juan Felipe Herrera, who explored truth-telling and the role of the artist in society. Through these lectures, we've had a chance to look at the role of truth in aesthetics. But today, we are blessed to have our Provost, Dr. Michael Emerson, who will address the topic, What is the truth about race and racialization in the United States? As you know, we're at a very important and crucial juncture in the history of the U.S. around conversations of race and justice. William Fry, in an op-ed in the LA Times, coined the phrase, diversity is the new majority. So Dr. Michael Emerson, who, as I mentioned, is our provost, is also a professor of sociology and urban studies. He's a specialist in race, religion, and urban issues. Before coming to North Park, he was a professor at Rice University and University of Notre Dame. He's authored or co-authored over 60 articles and reports and 15 books, several of which have won national awards. His book, Divided by Faith, Evangelical Religion and the Problem of Race in America, is considered a seminal work in the area of race and religion and is one of the best-selling books in sociology for the last 20 years. So we're really honored to have him here. Would you join me in welcoming Provost Michael Emerson?
Well, good morning and thank you for being here. I am definitely going to be using PowerPoint because this is a teaching session, so we get to learn together with PowerPoint. Yes, and now I'm going to see if I can advance. Appears not. So maybe if you could help me up there and do it instead, or just point it at you. There we go. Did I do that or did you? I did. Thank you. This is how you begin all talk. It's just a dialogue with somebody you can't see. I want to make sure that we're clear on three terms because whenever we talk about race, everybody has their ideas of what that means. People throw around terms like racism and so on. So I want to be clear on how I am using them, and how I'm using them is how sociologists use them. So race in the United States, and I have to say that in the United States because race is defined in different ways in different societies. So what does it mean for us here? I think this is the most interesting of all, that we make categories of people based on what? Exclusive and discrete, so you can't be multiple races at once, although we'll see that's changing. And it's based on selected physical characteristics. We know, we grew up in a society like this, we know which ones to use. We could use many other things. We could use ear size, foot size, many other things we could do, but we don't use them. And they would seem silly for us to use them because we have learned a different way. Second, that our groups were created and evolved distinct from one another. So, as we had mentioned this before, this is not the case in many societies. You can be multiple, and you can switch your race as you grow up. That would just be unheard of in here, unless you're trying to pretend you're something else. It's inheritable. So in race in the United States, it's passed on from your parents. So the trouble and confusing part is if your parents are two different races, then that enters you and you are having to wrestle with who am I? Because I'm two different things. Again, in many societies, and this is many societies to the south of us actually, you can have 4 siblings and they're all different races even though they have the exact same parents. Because it's based on what is your actual skin color, what is the job that you have once you grow up, how much money do you make? That's actually linked with race in a way it is not here. And then 2 other things, very important, that these outer characteristics that we learn to use to identify say something about who we are on the inside. And so we might not conform to the stereotype and people will say you're an unusual whatever, or you don't seem like. But we use these as shorthand to first figure out who people are, and then if we can get time to get to know them individually, we may change our mind. The most important thing is that race is an inegalitarian ethos. Anytime you see race used anywhere in the world, it is to rank groups of people. So in the US, these are our 5 categories of race. People come from all over the world, they're every ethnicity, they have every identity, but ultimately we have 5 melting pots. We don't have one melting pot. And these are the 5 current melting pots. Again, these have changed over time. And in 2000, the government said, hey, you can be more than one race. And about 2.3% of Americans say that currently. Although if you ever heard me talk before, I will say what's interesting is that the government lets you check more than one race, but does not count you in that way. So if you say you're multiracial, you have to check what racial groups you are. And then the government says if you're white and something else, you're classified as the something else. If you're 2 something elses, I'm black and Hispanic, they have an algorithm that runs and puts you into one or the other category. Partly we'll see this because of our laws are all built on keeping track of if we're doing fair practices with the assumption that we are one race or another. Okay, so a second term then, racialized society. This will be very important for what we're talking about today. Race matters profoundly for differences in our life experiences, in our opportunities, in our social relationships. So societies where race impacts our life, we say are racialized. The US is one of the most racialized societies, as we will look at, because it has been with us since we began, and because it is woven into our laws. What's interesting is, for example, we don't marry randomly people. Race shapes who we encounter, who we end up falling in love with, who we marry. Rewards are allocated unequally by racial group. That's another strong characteristic of racialized societies. And ultimately, it is woven into our social structures. These are big terms, I know, but we'll look at real examples here in a moment. Our assumptions are worldviews. All right, racism. So, with our idea in mind of what a racialized society is, racism is very different than the way lots of us use it on the street. So look what it is and what it is not. What racism is a changing ideology that has a constant purpose. Racism's purpose is to justify being racialized. So when we expose and say, look at these huge racial gaps, the racialized society goes into effect and says, well, it's not really race, it's class. This is because some people do this and some people do that. It is always the effect of trying to say it is okay that we are racialized. What is racism not? Not what we usually say it is, which is a product of an individual who has racial prejudiced thoughts or acts in a discriminatory way. That is not what racism is. That is racial prejudice. That is racial discrimination. It is because racism is not something an individual can do. A group must do it together. So it's the collective misuse of power to benefit one group at the expense of another group. So racism is rational for the group that benefits from it. It will not go away on its own by educating people and say you should be nice to each other, because people get very real benefits. And we will look in a moment at these very real benefits from a society that's racialized. Okay, and then finally, it need not be intended to be racism. All right. So we've looked at 3 terms. Now let's actually look at this racialization. Let's look at real data, real charts. Okay, so one of the things we said about race is that it allocates rewards unequally by group. Traditionally, then, we can say whatever the rewards are in society, and they can vary by society. Traditionally, in the US, we've had white and black. But as we've grown more diverse, we have a second plane of understanding what race is. So it's intersection of how we allocate rewards and whether you're seen as American or foreigner. Okay? So we have then Asians and Hispanics who can be at different levels in terms of income and other societies' rewards, but perpetually foreigner, whereas whites and blacks are perpetually seen as Americans, and you'll notice that Native Americans don't make it anywhere on the list, just the forgotten. So you can start to see this pattern. So what I'm doing is looking at adult male income over time, 1990 through 2008. It hasn't changed since. But you see that white, non-Hispanics, and Asians, males, they make very similar incomes. And then you have a second category, black and Hispanic, make very similar incomes. As the economy changes, people's income changes, but the gap just stays about the same over time. I have a picture here. I don't know if you can tell what this is, but these are the wealthiest Americans, at least as of 2010, when I painstakingly went through all 400 Forbes wealthiest people, and I categorized them by race. And you can see among our wealthy, $387 are white, 9 are Asian, 3 Hispanic, 1 is African American. Who would that be? Oprah. And no Native Americans. So you see it at the top end of our income distribution. One of the things I do as a sociologist is I keep track of racialization. Anytime at least 10 studies say there is racialization in this category, I record it, and that's what's coming up now. So in the US in 2016, these are at least the 39 ways that we are racialized. I know you won't have time to look at them all, but just to give you a sense, it's quite a list. This is important to keep track of. And I only have one slide on this, but even as I was learning about race, this one was hard for me to grasp. Race changes. The racialized society changes. Our definitions change. And we've had 3 major periods in the US. The first period we're usually well familiar with. I'm not sure why these keep coming up, but that's okay. Somebody control. Okay. Racial caste. So we know about this slavery times. When that ended, we had the most amazing period in US history. We've never approached it since, called Reconstruction, just a 12-year period where there was no clarity in what race meant anymore. And so what resulted is that people that were enslaved just a few months before started getting elected to Congress as US senators, mayors, governors. We had more US senators that were African American then that we've had since. So it was an incredible period, but you can imagine folks that were in power before in slavery times found this very disturbing reality. And so it took about 12 years to put a new system in place. We actually put 2 systems in place. In the South, what's called Jim Crow segregation. Jim Crow is a reference to a white actor that used to go around the South in blackface and pretend to be the happy slave. So it was this idea, we'll return to better times for African Americans when whites sort of control their lives. And in the North, we've had what we call de facto segregation, which we'll look and see how that's still working today. Well, that went until we had a very major upheaval in the 60s that we're aware of, and we entered a true period of racial progress, 1968 to 1980. We see it in almost every measure. People getting education, the rates of college graduation, the rates of finding jobs, getting good employment, making money, the gaps closed. But then they stopped, and they've either stayed frozen since then or they have gotten wider. Because we put a new system in place. As our economy changes, these systems change as our economy changes. When we're no longer predominantly agrarian, it no longer makes sense to be a society that's enslaving people. We are in a new age, entering it wholly in 1980, what we call the information age, where instead of making stuff, we make ideas, and we spend our time on our internet, and people get very wealthy by making YouTube videos or coming up with ideas that are online. And that's a huge part of our creative economy, as we call it. So we entered into a new period called colorblind racialization. This period then means, as we will see, a couple of things. The way that colorblind racialization works is with these 4 steps, which I want to show you how they work. These 4 steps are what we do in the modern era. And I have to make them rhyme. We decolorate, we segregate, we incarcerate, and we alienate. So let's look just briefly at what these mean. The whole basis of this system is that we must be colorblind, and we are colorblind. We are a society that has moved past race, so we need not talk about it. And if you talk about it, you're doing a bad thing. It's a violation of the assumptions of our new society. Okay, it took firm hold in 1980, and then this picture is the idea of it's all behind us now. That's what we're supposed to hold on to. When you do that, of course, it makes it very difficult to talk about any existing disparities because you're not supposed to, which makes it quite effective for staying there because you notice it less. If you couldn't talk about your cancer, it'd be tough to treat it. Segregate is our second step. I'm going to show you a couple of different maps. So here's Detroit, probably the most segregated city currently, although Chicago's close. What you're seeing here, the red is where we have high concentrations of African Americans, 85% or more in neighborhoods. And there's just a small Hispanic population you can see towards the south of Detroit, and then the rest is overwhelmingly white. Very clear who lives where, and you would know if you crossed the line. In fact, I think they call it 8 Mile Road or something in Detroit. Well, let's go a little bit to the north. Milwaukee, also highly segregated. And they have a little larger Hispanic population that you can see in kind of the yellow there. Very clear side of town that is for African Americans. And then the whole rest of the metro is white neighborhoods. This is Chicago. I got a little different map here. The green are the black neighborhoods, majority black. The, I guess that would be orange, are Latino neighborhoods. The purple are white neighborhoods, and then you can see a few neighborhoods, including where we are, where there's no majority. So there's just a few. I want to show you why this works this way. There's a number of reasons. When my wife's here today, we moved to take a job at Rice University in Houston, Texas. Moved there in 1999, and we moved to this neighborhood. It's a brand new neighborhood. They were building the houses as fast as they could. So you can see it's a cul-de-sac. And I am a sick sociologist. I actually know the race of every person that lives in every house on our block. And there it is. The little arrow points to where we lived. There were no interracial families on our block anyway. You can see that it's very diverse. There's many immigrants here too. If we put them into our racial categories, and you can see 32% black, 18% Hispanic, 27% Asian, and 23% white. 5 years later, I took a job at Notre Dame and we moved. Again, as a sick sociologist, I kept track in the 5 years we were there, who moved and who moved in, who moved out, who moved in. So in 2004, you'll see up there, every time someone moved, yep, go ahead. So there were these moves, and for example, for us, when we sold our house, a Vietnamese family bought it. And the neighborhood stayed diverse, but all the white people were gone. So it's diverse without white people. 45% black, 23% Hispanic, 32% Asian. This is what we find in our statistical studies, metro after metro across the entire US. By the way, I'm showing you one block. This is a subdivision of hundreds of blocks. The exact same thing happened block after block. You can have diversity in the United States long term as long as it doesn't include white folks. That's what we're finding in the data. They won't stay, they move on. This has really big implications. A lot of times people will say to me, students will say, so what? People choose where they want to live, that's fine. It's a free country. It has real implications, and this is one of them. So what you see here is, these are only people that make it on here. They are poor and they live in urban areas, but it's, what is their experience of poverty based on how many other people in their neighborhood are poor? All right, so we're looking at white, black, and Hispanic. So for white, the most common experience if you are poor and white, living in America's urban areas, is that you live in non-poor neighborhoods. Less than 20% of the people in your neighborhood will be poor. And then you can see for black and Hispanic, it's the very opposite, that the most common experience if you're poor is that you live in concentrations of high poverty. Now people will say, why would that be? It's because of one thing, segregation by race. It benefits whites by putting them in less high areas of poverty and putting blacks and Hispanics in areas of high poverty. As long as we have an economic gap between these groups, which we do, we've seen that already, if you force then that gap to be concentrated by race, this is what you will always get. And what do we know as sociologists? When you concentrate poverty like this, crime goes up at an incredible rate. Dropouts from high school goes up at an incredible rate. All kinds of social ills are the result. Look at this. We are told as Americans, buy a home, keep your home nice, and you will make money on it someday. It'll become worth more. You can either borrow money on it to use it for things, or eventually you sell it and you make money. What this study was, looked at Milwaukee, 1971 to 1993. A researcher painstakingly went through every single home and said, over that period, how did the value change? So he divided it into white and black. His question was, if you bought a house for $40,000 in Milwaukee in 1971, what did you sell it for? What was it worth in 1993? Look at this. So if you were white, it was worth $250,000. So but just by living in your house for that 20 years, you added to your net wealth over $200,000. If you're black in that period, you still owned a house, you lost money. The income gap, they're doing the same thing, but the income gap, the wealth gap in particular, is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Why? Segregation also drives up the value of white neighborhoods because everybody's trying to get there because they know those values will go up. If too many people who aren't white go there, whites move to a different neighborhood as we've seen, but they're making money in the process. Well, look at, some of you say, as I would say, I wasn't even born in 1993, so that's probably not what happens anymore. So I had my graduate students at Rice University do this for Houston. They did it 2005 until November of last year, when the last data was available. And they even got more sophisticated because they said, if we could make the neighborhoods identical statistically, that they have the same quality of schools, that they have the same commute times to work, and that the poverty rates are the same, does race matter in what happened in your value of your home in this time? So the only difference is they're controlling and making everything else the same is what kind of neighborhood. Is it a white neighborhood, Hispanic neighborhood, or a black neighborhood? Okay, so this is what they found. If you purchased a home in 2005 and sold it in 2015, at the end of 2015, whites made $82,000 on average for their homes in that 10-year period. Hispanic neighborhoods lost $4,400. Black neighborhoods lost $26,500. Again, driving a greater wealth gap, even though they're doing the same things. Well, this gets personal for my wife and I and our children. This is our neighborhood that we lived in the Houston area until just recently. We moved here. So 80% African American, 16% Latino, 4% other. All right, look, let me tell you our experience. So in 2006, we moved back to Houston, built a house in a fairly new neighborhood again. That's how much it ended up costing us. We had to sell because our job was sending us to Denmark. And we couldn't rent the house out. We were told we couldn't rent it for what we owed. So we were going to sell. So we knew we'd have to take a loss of some sort because we were told that directly. We were able to find a buyer who said, we'll pay you $225,000. If you've ever had to sell a house before, you know then the next step is an appraiser comes in and tells you what your house is worth. So our appraiser said, you cannot sell your house for $225,000 because your house is worth $160,000. And it's worth that because that's the home values around you have dropped, therefore your home value has dropped. What amazed us is that the appraiser never came into our home even. It could have been trashed, it could have looked beautiful, it had no bearing. It was just what are the houses around us worth. Okay, so in December of 2012, we sold it for the amount we were allowed to sell it for. And so our net gain in wealth is that we lost $113,000. Well, this matters. So when we moved to Chicago, we were excited to buy a home here in the general area, found a house 6 blocks south, and put in our application to get the loan, and we get a call back from the loan company. They said, everything looks good, but did you foreclose on a house in 2012? I said, no, we sold it for what we were told we could sell it for. Well, the government considers that a foreclosure. It's called a short sale. It's a foreclosure, and you're not allowed by government law to get a loan for the for 3 years. And after 3 years, you can only get an FHA loan, which has a maximum that you can borrow, and you have to pay insurance, even though we've owned homes for 25 years. So now we eventually got in a home because North Park helped us immensely, and because we have don't share this, but an offshore bank somewhere that I don't even know where it exists gave us partial loan to help us make it happen. I don't know if they are just on a boat somewhere. So, okay, so this has massive, massive impacts. And what I'm going to show you now on these next couple slides, I think is the fundamental tearing point in our society and why we're seeing the upheavals starting to happen. So, here is the net worth. Everything that you own minus everything you owe. What do you got left? So this is different than what do you make in your daily job. It's all of your assets that you have minus everything that you still owe on. In 2002, the average African American was worth $6,000. The average Hispanic was worth $8,000. The average white, $90,000. That's quite a gap, right? White-Hispanic gap was 11. Whites had 11 times the amount of wealth as Hispanics. But that had actually grown since 1988, not gotten smaller. If I can get the next one here. And the white-black ratio, 15 times. So whites in 2002 had 15 times the wealth of the average African American. And that had grown a fair bit since 1988, not getting smaller. There's a great study that happens at the University of Michigan. They've sampled and followed the same families, in this case just white and black, since 1984. And they've been looking at the wealth gap, what's happened. And this is what they found in that period. The gap between white and black has increased fourfold. We can map it and see why. It's not that African Americans have lost money, it's that whites have been gaining money. Their home values have been going up. With more money they can invest, and investing and making the same 5%. If you have more, you make more, that kind of thing. So you can see what's been happening in this new economy and new type of society, racialized society we have. It's now the wealth gap that is becoming the issue. So our latest data is 2012, and this is from our U.S. federal government Census Bureau. Whites have 50% more wealth than Asians, now 18 times more wealth than Hispanics, and 20 times more wealth than African Americans. I don't know of any society long-term that can survive with this. And it isn't stopping, as you can see. Every time we update the statistics, it gets larger. Our church has issues too, and I'm just going to show a couple of slides here. We define a non-segregated congregation as at least 20% of another racial group. So no single racial group is 80% or more of a congregation. We have statistical reasons why we use that. I won't go into it. But just when we then looked in the U.S. across all congregations, this is what we found, that our congregations are 10 times more segregated than the segregated neighborhoods they sit in. Okay? And then if we compare them to our public schools, 20 times more. So even if our churches came to represent the neighborhoods they're in, it would be a massive growth in diversity inside our congregations. We did a national survey and we asked people, are most or all of your friends the same race as you? We asked it a little bit more complicated than that. We asked them to name their friends, then we asked them a bunch of questions, one of which was the racial composition of their friends. And I'm going to show you the difference by 3 categories. Whether you're in what we call a homogeneous church, whether you're not in a church at all, and whether you're in a diverse church. What did they say in terms of their friendships? So people that are in same-race churches, 83% said most or all my friends are my race. If they don't go to a congregation, they don't have that extra level of reinforcing racial segregation, it's down to 70%. But look what happens if they go to multiracial churches. Only 36% say most or all my friends. What I'm showing you here below is that for every group this happens. Okay, and one of the things we want to do, we went and interviewed people then. Did this diversity of your friendships happen before you got here or after you got here? And 80% of people said, when I came to this congregation, my friendships diversified because I started meeting people I otherwise wouldn't meet. They started inviting me to their homes. They started introducing me to people I otherwise never would have seen. So a lot of it happens because you create a structure that was diverse and it diversified their friendships. The third thing is incarcerate. We hear a lot about this. And I think by far this most influential book, The New Jim Crow. I won't go into it. I just want to say, if you haven't read it, please do read it. The subtitle, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness. Why does it matter when we racially convict people at very different rates? If you are black or Hispanic and you are male and you do not graduate high school, the majority of you, about 70% of you, will go to prison at least one time. So it's the common experience, okay? Here's the implications when you have a felony, be it a drug offense or have been imprisoned. All kinds of them. You can't get student loans. So if you wanted to try and come to North Park, you would not be allowed to get federal student loans because you have a record. You cannot live in public housing. You can't serve on juries. You'll have to wait at least 12 years to vote. We know it's very difficult when you have a record to find work. Much more likely to be sent back to prison, in part because you're really caught. And then her ultimate argument is, what we used to do with Jim Crow, we now use this system to create a group of people who are forever second-class citizens. They can never be fully American citizens. And then finally, we alienate. We hear a lot about this in our presidential elections. The key here is this is saying is, even the terms we use, right? We don't say illegal immigrant, we say illegal alien, not even a human being. You're something from somewhere else. You're foreign, as if you're from a different planet. So terms matter too. And ultimately, we're at a huge crossroads. And it's not just here, of course. This is happening across the world, as there's much bigger movement of people trying to find ways to make a living, escape difficult political situations. Country after country is facing this issue. What do we do? So to reiterate then, our 4 steps in the modern era: decolorate, segregate, incarcerate, alienate. All right, one last slide on the implication, then a couple of slides on what can we do. This was an amazing study, and what they did was they looked at income inequality by country, all the developed countries of the world, and then they created a scale of social problems in that country. You may not be able to read it, but they're adding up the trust level of the people in their society, the level of mental illness, substance addiction, the life expectancy of people, infant mortality, obesity, children's educational performance, teen births, homicides. Put that all into one measure and call that the social problems measure of a society, and then plot it by income inequality of a society. We have one single measure to measure how much variation between the wealthiest and the poorest. We won't get into how that's done, but it's a very strong line. So at the very low end, the least income inequality and the least amount of social problems is Japan and Scandinavia. And some people, you'll notice, they're fairly homogeneous places. Go up the scale, and it's a perfect line until you get to the U.S. The U.S. is both the most income inequality of any of these nations, but has even a higher rate of social problems than would be predicted by their income inequality because of its racial divisions, drives it to a different sort of line. Okay, so what can we do? We love mercy and want to do justice. I love this quote from Martin Luther King. This came from a book he wrote. We will be greatly misled if we feel that the racialized problem will work itself out. Structures of evil do not crumble by passive waiting. Evil must be attacked by a counteracting persistence, by the day-to-day assault of the battering rams of justice. So it's a long-term approach. I want to just suggest 3 things as a strategy for change, and then I'll finish. One is that we determine that one role as religious organizations, not just as individuals, but as part of organizations, churches, parachurches, that is our work, that we really are, as people of faith, called to do the work of justice and not accept what society has presented us. We have to develop our focus by considering the level and type. So what do I mean by that? Okay, so where do we want the change to happen? Within individuals or within organizations, or even broader than that? And how are we going to do that? How are we going to focus our change? By focusing on the internal or the external? So if we think we should work on changing individuals internally, we might focus on converting their heart conversion, we call it, personal study, transformation personally. Maybe we are interested in external. So people aren't able to get jobs, we're going to help provide educational training, job assistance, and so on. We might want to do bigger change and think that the issue needs to happen at a broader level. Internally, I'm in this case using example of churches. They can begin a diversity organization within it or within our denomination. We have done that. A theology of justice and begin building that for the parishioners. I have something called Dinners of Six. We were in a church, my wife and I, where once every month we got together with a group. The group was by design in the church, it had to be diverse, and we got together to have dinner. Sometimes we'd be assigned, if we were all married, bring your wedding photo book and tell about the customs of getting married. And it's stunning how we have very different customs depending on where we come from in the world. But it was a way, and 6 months later, redo the groups, get to know new people, trying to get a change of who we know. And then finally, at the largest level, we could do immigration reform. This is when we're focusing on structure and trying to do external. I usually recommend for people that want to make change as an organization or group, choose 2 of those levels and focus on one thing at each level. Don't just choose one, but 2 things. I'm trying to get to my last slide here. If someone can help me. It's gone. There? I'm going to use this moment to take a drink. Let's see, they're working on it. Okay, and finally, we have to commit to building networks. Usually when people want to make a change, they say, what can I do? And they start up something on their own without thinking that people are already doing it. People are already working. The issue is that there aren't enough people working on these. There isn't enough resources. So make that your first bent. Okay, we want to do something. Somebody's already trying to do it. How can we help join them in what they're doing? And I think that is it. Okay. Thank you so much, and we're going to turn it over.
Thank you, Dr. Emerson, for your words and for showing us why research matters both individually and structurally. Thank you for committing your academic expertise and your intellect to making a better society. Thank you for showing us the intellectual and academic tools that will enable us individually, socially, structurally to change our schools, our institutions, including this one, our organizations, to be more just organizations, to be more just places. At this point, I would like to introduce you to Dr. Daniel White Hodge, who is a professor at this university. He's the director of the Center for Youth Ministry Studies at North Park. He teaches classes on urban youth ministry, film, youth and postmodernism, media, and youth and adolescent development. He's the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Hip Hop Studies. He's ministered for over 17 years with organizations like Young Life, World Vision. He's worked with undocumented youth all over the country, in Los Angeles, and he continues to be an advocate for urban youth justice issues. Dr. Daniel White Hodge, would you join me in welcoming him?
Good morning. How y'all doing? Good morning. All right. Let me get this mic all set up here, man. Oh, mercy. I'm just going to go like that. Is that all right? I'm going to go old school like this. Well, I am pleasured to be with y'all this morning. I think this particular topic resonates a lot, obviously, with what my life has been about and the work that I have done. Probably one of the hardest things to do is to navigate the role of a Christian and also claiming some identity in ethnic minority status. So oftentimes it is easy, like Dr. Emerson was saying, to be overlooked and to almost erase your ethnic identity. And particularly when I was with organizations like Young Life, there was a period that it wasn't acceptable to be your ethnic minority. It was this racialization, this idea of colorblindness, erased that and said, well, we're beyond that. We have moved beyond that, so why do we need to continue having a conversation? Why do we need to continue having these conversations? Because you're only making the problem worse. And so for a period, particularly in my younger years in ministry, I just denied who I was. And it was interesting because it was like I was the nice black guy. I wasn't like the other black people. And that did something to me. And so I imagine as well it does things to other people as well. So these are big things that Dr. Emerson is talking about. And so I come to you with a sense of urgency this morning. I am thankful that we are putting on a conference here. I'm thankful that we are doing something like this. But the reality of it is that what is happening outside of these doors moves well beyond what's written in a book and what's done in a classroom. One of the commitments I have is to go out into the city of Chicago and to engage in issues. I live on the corner of North and Austin on the west side of Chicago in Oak Park. And so I see some of these things every day, the lack of jobs for particularly young men. The dislocation of those young men, and Emil Durkheim calls it the system of anomie, this sense of displacement that I don't know where to go, I don't know where to be, I don't have a sense of direction. And a simplistic answer from church people would be like, well, they just need Jesus. They just need to go to church. And I would say to you and contend this morning that we need to push beyond that, because we're past that. And if you're having problems and difficulty with this, you dang sure ain't going to be able to take the millennials, the young black millennials who are involved with the Black Youth Project, who are involved with Black Lives Matters, who are involved with Ferguson Action. Because those young people ain't going to be as nice as I'm going to be this morning. They're going to come in and they're going to let you know that we're tired of taking this thing and taking it sitting down. Why are people only showing up when cameras are around? And so we've got some major problems. And so again, I come to you with a sense of urgency that action is needed. I've been doing this for a long time. And so I'm starting to get a little tired. There's a reason why in the NFL football, they only give you 45 seconds to get the next play going, right? I think we need to have something like that for the church. We need to move it out. It's enough praying, enough rallying, enough, going on buses, and, we need action now. And here's the reality. I'll just go ahead and call it out since we're calling things out. I'll start with myself. I am a relatively privileged black man living in this society. I have a title. I know how to tie a bow tie, you know what I'm saying? I have a career, and so I am relatively overlooked right now. I mean, it doesn't mean that I don't get my monthly pullover and where you going, what you been, frisking and all that stuff like that. That still happens. But it just doesn't happen as brutal as it happens to young men, particularly young men of color under the age of 20 or perceived to be under the age of 20. And I know the minute that I take this suit off, right, I'm still a nigga. And that's the reality of where we're at right now. And until we're really ready to engage with the nigga reality in this country, we ain't ready to do nothing. We ain't ready to do nothing. I know some of y'all looking at me like, man, he's crazy. I told you, I'm going to be nice this morning. I'm thankful for Dr. Emerson because oftentimes it takes a white male to tell you that things are messed up. And oftentimes a black man saying this stuff is just looked at as angry, as disheveled. Hey, but his reality of it is I got a right to be angry. There's a whole bunch of stuff. As Kamasi Brown says, social activist and leader in Los Angeles and Watts says, he says, I am fed a spoonful of hatred every day. That's my diet, a spoonful of hatred every day. And so many of these young people are fed that every single moment. And so it's just a matter of time before that stuff erupts, or upon whom you're going to erupt on, right? And so we start looking at these things, we have some major issues. Black Youth Project put together a survey, general social survey, and this is what they found. This is just some of the statistics they found, along to coincide with what Dr. Emerson is talking about. 80% of black churches feel that the police killings and the police brutality are part of a larger systemic and structural problem. Okay, 80%. Compare that to 75% of white evangelicals who don't think that there is anything wrong with that. And the number goes up of white evangelicals, 82% of those who believe that it's justifiable for police to beat down somebody who was not listening to them. Little disconnect there, right? Because we've had a steady diet since the 1970s of police as heroes, as police as people who are just and right and moral, and that even when the police officer is bad, right? You go to early movies like Dirty Harry, right? The anti-hero, if you want to get into film theory, right? Even still, he's still got the bad guys, and the bad guys deserve to be killed. And so it's difficult to believe that these young men and women, it's difficult to believe that Sandra Bland, right, did anything. Well, she must have done something, right? That's the excuse, right? And so we see this disconnect. Why was Laquan running? He should have just stopped. Then we get into the nitty-gritty of it, the politics of respectability. Because the reality of it is, I know Bill Cosby did what he did, all right? Yes, of course he did what he did. You can't have that many women. I mean, even if you have one woman, but I know it's hard to believe women these days. It's hard. You need a whole bunch of them to believe anything before you believe a woman, right? Whole bunch of them. Well, how many you got? 45? Okay, can we get 50? Because you got 50. I believe 50, but I don't know about no 45. I don't know about that. But here's the thing. Bill Cosby, I don't know if he's going to bounce back. We got to remember, people who have raped and pillaged and murdered, who are actors, I've worked in Hollywood, who are white men, they're coming back. We forget about Rob Lowe back in the 80s. Forget what he did. Young women, rape. Oh, but no. As Cornel West says, we live in the United States of amnesia. We tend to forget a lot of things. Well, here's what else. Pew Research just put out a study, 2015 American Values Survey. You can look these up, you can Google this stuff. Amazing. It's a big, thick packet. You can read it. But here's just some of the things they found. 60% of African Americans, black folks, 54% of Latinos believe that the U.S. culturally is actually headed in a good direction, that we have improved and we're getting better since the 1950s. Compare that to 57%, and in some swatches, 62% of whites who say we're worse since the 1950s. Now, the 1950s, of course, as you know, is a time, particularly after World War II. I'm glad that Dr. Emerson mentioned this, kind of these structural and societal changes. World War II was really the last just war that we can look at. It was the time when America really felt like, we were the best. We're the moral police. We are the ones who got things right. We went and kicked Nazi Germany's butt. We defeated, tyrannical Japan, and we dropped not one but 2 atomic bombs, and so we're correct. It's actually a time, one of the projects and books that I'm working on right now is looking at kind of the rise of missionaries, and that was kind of the increase of short-term missionaries, or even the word short-term missionaries even came about right around in the 60s as well. And so this rise of missionaries who were overseas said, oh man, we have this amazing opportunity, right, to go out and give the gospel. And so the 1950s was a time when white male supremacy reigned true. And so now we see that white male supremacy being challenged. And when I say white supremacy, I don't mean neo-Nazis. I don't mean the Ku Klux Klan. I don't mean people who have shaved kids' heads and swastikas, okay? Because those people terrify me on an institutional regard. But I don't have to interact with those people on a day-to-day basis. What I mean by white supremacy is I mean good, well-intentioned white people, white people who believe they are good, lovers of God, churchgoers, who have no idea that whiteness, the color of their own skin, has been an oppressive tool for people of color for generations. People who continue to insist that white is right. And of course, that gets it into our theological DNA, and we begin to call out what is just a Christian theology. Look at what's happening at Wheaton. I gotta say it. Look exactly what's going on at Wheaton. And no one sat there. I mean, that could have been handled in an email and a simple phone call. Like, hey, man, I heard you post something. You did? All right, we good. All right, we straight. But no, the politics of respectability, exactly what Dr. Emerson is talking about, this shift, this racialization is exactly what's going on there. And above that, of course, the attack on black women as well. That's for another talk. So what do? Man, I think we need to lament. I think a large part of what we do, and we overlook this, I see this in undergraduate students all the time. We want to hop to the solution without ever sitting in what the problem actually is. And it is too easy just to hop over some of these things without really looking at what caused some of these things to begin with. And what we're talking about is some real hard stuff. I'm talking about microaggression. You know what that is, right? Little passive digs and little passive ways of having racism come out, right? I remember I first witnessed microaggression as a kid. My mom, who was Mexican-American, was at a convenience store, and I remember she handed the white clerk some change, and he just took one look at her, and rather than handing her the change back into her hand, he just placed it on the counter and stepped away. That's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about when I go to the farmer's market and an old white male cuts me off in line, doesn't even see me there. Don't think it doesn't happen in the church. It's happening right now. Just go to any conference and look at who's the headliner of speakers. Who are the experts of Christian theology, right? We got to begin to kind of break some of these things down because racism is in our theological DNA. You got to remember, Emile Kant said it like this: the white European way is the exact way that people should learn from. It is the best way people should learn from. I remember we have Kantian ethics classes. This DNA, this stuff, this theological DNA, I can expound on that later, but I don't have time. Let me wrap this up. That stuff is stuff that is much more ingrained because it's too easy to just go on a march. And I'm not calling out marches. I've been doing marches for a long time. There ain't nothing wrong with them. But again, the stuff that I'm talking about is so interpersonal. That's why it's so easy for people to go overseas and do missionary work over there, because I ain't got to deal with it. I didn't cause the problem in the Congo. I didn't cause that in the Darfur. That wasn't me. It's so much harder to go right across Foster Avenue and look at some of the numbers that Dr. Emerson is talking about. What about some of those numbers? What do you do with some of those numbers? And somebody told me, I'm coming from Los Angeles, they're telling me, man, Chicago's racialized. Man, I didn't know how racialized this community was. Man, but don't think, and then again, that stuff just doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen by accident. Highways and freeways are designed in cities to lock people in. The whole city of Los Angeles is designed that way. If you look at a map of the city of Los Angeles, all the hoods are barricaded in by freeways. And then what they did in the early 2000s, and they went in and what they called it were sound barriers, but they put up these 50, 60-foot walls, and now you can drive through places like Watts and South Central and not even have to ever see them. That doesn't happen by accident. That doesn't just happen because, oh, how did that happen? No! And these are well-intentioned, well-moral people. And here's the thing, we're moving beyond white supremacy. We also got to get into what Michael Eric Dyson calls the Afro-aristocracy and the ghetto-aristocracy within the African-American black community. We can't just leave it at just the white people, right? And then we got to start getting into how do we treat our Asian brothers and sisters? And do we really know the difference between Japanese and Chinese Americans? Oh, man, this stuff is deep. Koreans? Well, I don't know. I mean, they're all Chinese, right? You know, it's like, you know, some of my Latino friends, like, they're all chinitos, you know, they're all Chinese, right? No, they're not. You don't like being called a Cuban, do you? No, I ain't no Cuban, Holmes. And I know, exactly. There's a difference. There's a difference. So approaches to change, the personal and the structural, we do. We need a ground and we need an air attack. I think what Dr. Emerson is talking about is exactly correct. We need that. But here's the thing. As white people, you need to learn how to, one, listen to other stories and quit cross-examining people who are coming from an oppressed background. That didn't really happen. No, come on. Really? No. Then police are, well, you should have just stayed right there. You should have just been quiet. Nah. Listen. And begin to develop skills of what it really means to be an ally. Because it doesn't just stop at race. There's something called intersectionality, all right? That means that race and gender and sexuality and class all get muddied up in a very complex and muddied ideological structure. So how we treat trans black women, trans black men is a major issue. How we engage with gay and lesbian people, and I get it, you know, it's like, well, damn, that's a sin. I'm going to stop you right there and just say, man, How are we loving on people? How are we engaging people? How are we not continuing on? Are we giving up one oppressive condition to trade for another? So the personal, right? The personal work that I would say is much harder. It's easier to go and march and go protest and go do a little, especially nowadays, right? I can just get an app, put it on, I got my little petition sign, right? You know what I'm saying? I'm cool, right? But the personal is going to be so much harder because you got to do that hard work. One of my favorite movies by one of my favorite directors is Christopher Nolan. One of his premiere movies is Memento. And at the end of that movie, if you watch Memento, it's a confusing film, right? You know, and if you put it on your DVD on your laptop, you can actually way to get into it because it's put all out of order, out of sequence. It's all out of sequence shots. At the end of the film, which is actually the beginning of the film, you look at it, the quote that he says is so powerful because here he is, you find out, spoiler alert, that he's been the one killing all these people. He's searching this killer, John G., that has supposedly, allegedly killed his wife, but come to find out that he's the one who actually killed his wife. And you're like, whoa, who have I been cheering for? Exactly. And he says something very interesting that I want to leave you with this morning. He says, man, when I close my eyes, I have to believe that the world outside of me is exactly what I say it is. We all have mirrors that we watch. We all have mirrors that we see ourselves in. I have to believe that the mirror I see is exactly what I think myself is. I challenge you with that notion today and say, who are you? Where are we at on this? What do you do when you see something like this? How do you engage? And what about the effect of the people who are left at the throttle of oppression, at the boot and the tyranny of somebody like a police force that is not trying to protect them? I'll stop there. Thank you for this.